been a few years, Andrew, since you first came on the show at the World Conference on Timber Engineering, might be 3 or so years ago. What's been happening in the last few years in the evolution of mass timber construction for yourself?
Wow, 3 years. Well, I haven't been to South Korea in a while. I haven't been anywhere in a while. But in the last 3 years, I mean, we had, shortly after we met, it was the tragedy of the fire at Grenfell Tower in London, and which was just an awful event, both for the kind of wider construction industry, but unfortunately as well the kind of for the people involved, the wider construction industry, and the knock-on effect has very much affected the advance of mass timber construction in the UK. So we had quite a kind of a knee-jerk political reaction, which was ban everything combustible, everything that we can kind of see is just might burn, has to be, and we spoke to government, but they'd been lobbied hard by different industries, and they were apologetic that it was kind of collateral damage, and they could see that it was, the wrong thing to have happened, but, they had to get some policy out on the anniversary of Grenfell, on the anniversary of the fire. And so even though, one can work around these changes in building regulations, I think it's changed the perception in the UK, changed the perception of mass timber, which is incredibly frustrating because, we, in the UK, I think we were responsible for a lot of the original innovation, a lot of the kind of, a lot of the ambition in terms of height and mass of these buildings. And also, really sort of saw the kind of the feasibility of the incredible opportunity that building in timber provides in terms of kind of carbon savings. And what we have seen on the kind of plus side is outside of the UK, and now like half my work is outside the UK. So we've seen the incredible, enthusiasm which the French government, which kind of, others across Central Europe, the United States, Australia have really kind of taken this up, changing their building code to promote the use of timber buildings, promote the use of timber within buildings. And so that's kind of, that's, I think, kind of really those have been the principal drivers. I mean, I still have the same frustrations that I had 3 years ago, so, which is, lots of architects drawing buildings, coloring them brown and saying they're made of timber, and I think that there's kind of, lots more investment needed by the timber industry, by the manufacturing industry, which we haven't seen enough of. I think that, especially in Europe, what's happened is that the European manufacturers, as the markets dropped off in the UK, rather than investing in research, in adequate research, they've just begun to explore the market in the US. So we've been left high and dry in the UK, which is really annoying. So we don't have any more residential projects in the UK. We have residential projects in Sweden and Norway and Holland at the moment, and then office projects in the US, in Germany and Italy, and in Sweden as well. So, so I just kind of flick through my kind of like memory of projects. And so, we've become, we were house builders, and now we're office builders, which is great. And, and actually, I think a lot of that is around health and well-being as much as it is around kind of low carbon. And I remember that that study that Planet Arc did in Australia is one that we use all the time to demonstrate the kind of, the benefits, the health and well-being benefits of being in a timber environment. And the market is really, the development market has really caught onto that. They, for most offices, it's about the people that work there. In the UK, we know that, companies that turn over more than 5 million euros or so spend less than 5% on their rent for their building. So we know that there's but they spend 80% on their staff. So it's all about kind of keeping those people, keeping them happy, And being in a kind of being in a timber building, I think is a massive advantage for that. So we're seeing that drive, which is great.
Absolutely. And I want to delve a bit into commercial office buildings, but so you mentioned how Grenfell had an impact, and we had something similar happen in Australia. And due to flammable cladding, those who who don't know too much about mass timber, they might see the two things as they burn, so they're comparable. So do you think the way those fires happened is in any ways comparable to mass timber building?
No, it's got nothing to do with it. It's got nothing to do with it. It's incredibly frustrating. It's like, it's like somebody died of shellfish poisoning, so you take all the sheep off the market. Do you know what I mean? Take all the lamb off the shelves. It's like, it's really frustrating. And, when we speak to fire engineers, when we've spoken to, the people that write the code, that write the building regulations in the UK, they are absolutely straightforward about the fact that mass timber is collateral damage, and it is an unfortunate kind of side effect of writing a very simple code, is what they say. Which is really frustrating, because still, we have a government here at least and at last that is kind of pushing toward kind of zero carbon construction, and I'm confident that after COP26 in November this year, there will be a real move to thinking about globally, to thinking about and considering upfront carbon, the embodied carbon of construction. And when the governments do that, they're going to turn around and realize, well, that's actually no way of doing that without building in timber. And we just banned that. So now what do we do? So that's frustrating, and they exempted PVC windows, which is really infuriating. They were the windows that fell out and allowed the fire to spread. I mean, this is an awful kind of situation. The fire doors in Grenfell, they withstood the fire. The fire doors onto the escape stairs, they were made of timber. It's just kind of like, anyway, it's really frustrating.
Well, you have since then, I've seen you've completed some pretty incredible projects, and which were very innovative themselves. And I saw 6 Orsman Road. Can you tell us a little bit about this project, when it was completed, and some of the details and attributes of it?
Yeah, so that was our first kind of big office building that we finished last summer. And it's a steel frame which supports a CLT floor slab with a CLT core. So the CLT core and the floor slabs, they provide all the kind of shear capacity within the structure. So the kind of the wind load, and then the steel structure is picking up the gravitational load. So the steel structure is vastly reduced because the timber is so light, right? So usually when you have a steel and concrete building, your steel frame is supporting great big concrete floor slabs. Whereas here we're supporting lightweight CLT floor slabs. So we vastly reduced the amount of steel in the building. We specified it such that all the steel connections were bolted. So the building is very adaptable, already, because of a change in who's going to occupy the building. We had to put another staircase in the building. And what we did was we were able to just kind of like literally saw through the floor slab within, on 7 floors within a week. And then we used those kind of cutouts from the floor slab. We used some of that material to make the stairs. And then we made some furniture around the building out of the floor slab as well. So it was a very fast structure to put up. So no piled foundations, local raft foundation, very lightweight, really relative to a kind of concrete and steel building. Quite a kind of an interesting building for us. I mean, low carbon has always been our kind of driving message. More, low carbon is the kind of is the sketch, if you like, and building in timber is the result. We're not timber architects, we're low carbon architects. And timber is how we achieve that. And in this building, using steel really for the first time was quite a leap for us, because obviously, steel is quite a carbon intensive process, quite an energy intensive process to produce. But it is mostly recycled. So in terms of a kind of, the regenerative nature of the material, I think there are opportunities going forward in the future with steel when it can be produced as a kind of low carbon material, because it is adaptable, because they are, they're standard elements that you're working with. And those elements, if you bolt them together, can be unbolted and moved to the next job. The building can be adapted. So really kind of, I'm quite excited about that kind of idea that it's not just about building low carbon now, but making sure that these buildings have, long lifespans by making sure that they are adaptable, by making sure that you can kind of, that you can extend them, you can reduce them, you can kind of like change the floor plates around, etc. So that's all. So really excited about the result, and I kind of, and it looks good too.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I've got a picture of it just right now. I'm looking at it, and where it's like very different to a lot of other timber projects around the world. Like a lot of timber projects, they're boxy because it's kind of like the first generation timber design. Whereas this one, I guess, because you got the steel beams protruding and using CLT to sit on top, you've got big cantilevers, and you've still got quite an innovative and a really interesting shape to the building, as opposed to just being a square box, which a lot of buildings look like with timber.
Well, it's funny you should say that, actually, Adam, because the cantilevers are not big. There's not a cantilever there more than a couple of meters. And also we designed the building in timber. So you can do that in timber. And it is, certainly for us, it's about gaining more confidence with the engineering of our buildings and the understanding of how timber can perform and where we can push it and how we can push it. And I think you're right, that elevation has more dynamism than we've kind of become used to in timber, in the early days of timber architecture. I think for architects to understand how timber works, to understand, what the opportunities are, is, requires a really good working relationship with structural engineers, a good working relationship with the timber suppliers. But no, that building was designed all in timber. But then, what we couldn't at the time do was get the engineering to work, sinking the beams into the floor slab, which we're doing now. And so if we had built it completely in timber, the building would have been about 1.5 meters higher. And we were in a kind of tight urban situation where, in order to be able to get 6 floors, we had to be pretty kind of tight on the floor to floor heights.
You mentioned earlier a little bit about the Planet Arc research that shows, I think it's Wood and Wellness, a report, and I can put it in the show notes for those listening. We're seeing in Australia some buildings get higher rental yield and higher yields for the exposed timber, and because it's a biophilic design and you have benefits on human health. Is the building owner getting those benefits and increased yields for these attributes, you think?
Yeah, I'm absolutely convinced that that's the case. And I think that, that's going to be demonstrated by evidence in the coming year or so, when more of these buildings are completed around the world and people really begin to see the dividends. I think that, post-pandemic, what people are going to be looking for in a kind of, in the next normal will really be around health and well-being. And I think that, office occupiers are going to be, they're going to be demonstrating that by the buildings that they choose to be in. And I think timber buildings are really going to win out on that basis. Absolutely. I mean, it's ironic, isn't it? It's probably kind of, it's probably the health and well-being issues that will actually drive timber construction as much as the carbon issues. Although I would say that a lot of our new work in the last year or so hasn't come from developers, it's come from investors. So it's come from large investment companies wanting to build with low carbon strategies, finding that their usual development partners are being a bit slow off the mark doing that, and coming straight to us and saying, right, we've got this investment, we'd like to work with you, and then we'll go and find a developer.
Yeah, that's
It's kind of like, because they're looking at investments. They're not looking at a developer, which is often a pretty short kind of return. They're looking at a much longer return often. And they're thinking to themselves, well, what kind of building do I want to be, do I want to own in 10 years' time? Do I want to own a kind of like, a bizarre shaped concrete and steel building, with kind of dark glass and lots of plant? Or do I want one of these kind of beautiful, svelte, new timber buildings, which everybody loves to be in, I mean, it's kind of, it's a no-brainer.
absolutely. And yeah, it's that responsible investing, which like consumers are just choosing where their retirement investments go. And it's circling back. We are seeing in Australia as well a few startups, I guess, who are backed by big green investment companies, which would normally see in the renewable energy space, but they're really getting into the mass timber space, which is really exciting.
Absolutely agree. And I mean, the great thing is that these deep green investments are actually, they're becoming the norm. They're not kind of, they're not the outliers anymore. This is kind of like, this is mainstream investment now. So, from private pension funds to kind of to public funds, people are making those choices.
Push that I'm seeing and you're seeing most likely in this the kit of parts design, which is easy from a manufacturer's point of view to just have a standardized kit and doing somewhat commoditized manufacturing and then assembling that like a Lego building versus architects also having their flexibility to design in their interesting ways. So are these two things going to combine to work together in the future, do you think, and change the way we design?
Yeah, they are already. They are already. I mean, it's the future of construction. I mean, the difference is we're not working with Lego bricks. We're making our own Lego bricks, and then, I mean, the beauty of working with CLT is it's so easy to kind of, to put through a CNC machine. And every time you put a panel through a CNC machine, that kind of continuous process is how a factory works. So it's incredibly efficient. But each file that goes into cutting that CLT can be completely different. So you can repeat the process, but not repeat the product. Yeah, so every time it's different. And certainly all the kind of like, all the sort of kind of projections for the future or thinking about the future that I see, it's all around that kind of, it's all around the BIM space, all around kind of parametric modeling. I don't think it's around volumetric modular. So I don't think it's about making boxes. I think it's about prefabricating elements and then assembling on site. More like car manufacture in the sense that, BMW don't make their own steering wheel. They don't make their own seats. They're bringing those onto site, and then they're assembling them on site. And I think that's definitely the kind of the future of construction. I think the kind of, the opportunity for kind of, for quality, for health and well-being for the workforce, I think kind of cost and program, reduction of risk, all of those things point towards that as a kind of great future for construction. And it works really well for timber. Timber's lightweight to transport, easily machined, easily adaptable, unlike concrete, very heavy, mostly done in situ, really kind of, I mean, you're casting a building basically there. Whereas one of the things I've always loved about working in engineered timber is that you have really kind of quite rudimentary material in terms of, it's just kind of planks of wood, planks of softwood and a tiny bit of adhesive. But we're using that material in an incredibly sophisticated way. We're using the kind of the finite element modeling, the kind of, there's all the kind of parametric modeling that we're using to produce those designs to, and to, that directly feed into those cutting machines. It's a really sophisticated process. So rudimentary material, sophisticated process. I love that kind of notion. And so, yeah, for sure, definitely the future is as much prefabrication as possible, constantly thinking, being aware of the kind of future adaptability of those structures and those buildings, I think is also really important. But no, for sure, I mean, that's what we're learning as a practice, what we're investing, researching, thinking, dreaming about is all those sorts of opportunities.
Absolutely. As we're moving toward the end now of the podcast, at the start we mentioned a few hurdles that might be happening in England, and for those listening, it's probably more so in England, we must say, than in Australia. If you're familiar with what's happening in Australia, um, do you do you see timber pushing through to become a real mainstream product going forward, and just being a small blip, what's going on in the UK at the moment?
I hope so. I hope so. I mean, what's going on in the UK at the moment is a bit weird. The whole country is a little bit topsy-turvy, not kind of like, I think really has had the rug pulled under it from, with regard to the pandemic and kind of like how terribly it's hit us. And at the same time, we've had Brexit, and there's a sort of vaguely kind of Dickensian feeling about the whole country at the moment, so but we're hurdlers, right? I've been jumping hurdles since I came out of college. So I'm fine with those challenges. I can see that research will become an increasingly important part of our practice. We need more research into timber construction, into the effects of fire, into opportunities of engineering, of manufacture, of the kind of parametrics that we're talking about, the digital twin space. All of those sorts of things are really important for the development of timber. But do I see the world being held up by a narrow-minded kind of jingoistic knee-jerk reaction of our kind of ignorant politicians? Nah, it's not going to get in the way. It's just we'll brush that aside shortly, I'm sure.
Mm. And what are the lessons? So you were really I'd say you'd be humble to admit it, but the pioneer with Stadthaus a long time ago. It really opened the doors for a whole new industry, which created jobs. So what I'm doing right now, for example, what have been the lessons you've learned since you've started and really opened the doors early days?
I think the lessons are to the lessons are to kind of prioritize what it is that you're trying to do. So what I always say to people in the studio is, pick your battles on every project. What is important to us here? Again and again, I mean, the health and well-being benefits of timber are really important, but getting timber buildings up is the most important thing. If we need to cover them in plasterboard for the next few years, then fine. But just, always have it in the back of your mind that the most important thing is to demonstrate to the world that timber is a viable alternative to concrete and steel. So it's about focus, concentration, thinking about the priorities in terms of of what you want to do, and realizing that actually the current situation is an opportunity for architects to demonstrate leadership, to demonstrate the opportunity of great design and great architecture. And I think that, the architectural profession has really, has come in for some flack over the last couple of decades, with actually, kind of quite well deserved, I think, in many ways. And I think that this is a real opportunity for the profession to demonstrate some leadership, to demonstrate some kind of the power of kind of research and thinking. So the power of design. So I think there's great opportunities out there for all of us that are involved and passionate about this. I think kind of prioritizing the ideas, prioritizing carbon, prioritizing the reduction of carbon is essential.
100%. And thank you so much for coming on the show, Andrew. If people want to find out more about yourself and the projects and everything you're up to, where should they be going?
To the website, and there's an email address at the website, and we do things like we have a kind of, we have a quarterly student session. Now it's been running about a year. So every quarter we have a kind of we spend an afternoon answering questions from students and kind of written in questions and stuff. So we do that. We're going to get kind of more widespread how we do that. I think one of the opportunities of the pandemic has been, what we're doing now. It's kind of opportunities for collaboration, global collaboration exists now in a way that didn't exist a year ago. So we need to kind of, I think, really, take that opportunity and run with it.